fair. Those are the three issues, but I'd like us to discuss them. So today's meeting is going to be more about trying to understand the brief from the client, then our interpretation of the brief, and then how do we go about designing a solution that makes sense, let's say, to the client's objectives. So those are the things that I'd like us to go through and at least understand. At the end of this meeting, I'll give you the work that we need to do by the end of the week and a sense of the timeline that we're working with to have this prototype done. So let me share my screen by saying that Wika essentially is a business that sees an opportunity in a gap that's created where women particularly, but it also applies to men. It's really about domestic violence. But mostly women are affected by domestic physical violence. And Wika is proposing a means by which women or anyone who suffers domestic violence abuse can actually report their abuse in a way that's safe, you could say accurate, and fair. Safe in that their privacy is protected and their identity is protected. They won't be exposed and they won't be tormented or further victimized because of the exposure. In that way, it's safe. When we say that it is, let's say, fair, I'll start with that. Fair simply means that people who are victims of domestic violence are looking for justice. So Wika is trying to propose that we will help you to get justice. So they don't give you the justice necessarily, but they facilitate you getting justice. And it's largely because of the way these things work. You find that oftentimes, a lot of times, the victim is traumatized and they don't know how to deal with the trauma. And in that state of trauma, they have a time frame within which they're supposed to report the case. They're supposed to have themselves checked, by an expert, by a doctor or hospital, that they have been violated, and they need to report to police, and they also need to engage a lawyer. And lawyers are engaged in very specific ways. If this is not done in a timely and accurate way, then they can't get justice because the case cannot be taken forward if there's a time delay or if the evidence is not provided. And if it's provided in ways that are adulterated or, inadmissible, then that kind of evidence is thrown out. So there's a process through which they have to go through that's time-based and quite specific on what they need to present and collect by way of data. So Wika facilitates that. And by facilitating that, they facilitate fair play. So they do get their day, you could argue, of justice or their day in court. So it's essentially Wika is a system that evokes a process that allows victims to, you could say, report cases of sexual violence. And this reporting, according to Wika, is important as the first step in not only getting justice, but in reducing instances of social violence. Because if people were to be abusive, let's say in domestic cases, if they knew that they could be reported quite quickly and this can be made known and they can also be prosecuted, it can contribute to reducing cases of, you can say, domestic violence. And this is the goal. Okay, if that's understood, then I'm sharing my screen now. You can see here, this is written by the client. So this is to give us a sense of what the client is saying. The objective of Wika is to create a secure and confidential platform that allows victims to anonymously report incidents. It aims to enable the submission of evidence and recordings to prevent threats and blackmail from perpetrators, ensuring the safety and privacy of victims throughout the process. Now, from that, the key elements that we're getting are the confidential reporting. Anonymity is from the public. In other words, the public doesn't know necessarily who's reporting, but they have to give their details. So their details are being captured by the system, but the system is private and protects those details. That's number one. Number two is this issue of secure information. I think I've just spoken to that. But secure information is making sure that the information is not known by perpetrators or known by people who would blackmail them, even known by society who would now stigmatize them. So that issue of data security is big on Wika. Confidential reporting is a sense of psychological well-being, that they feel that this information is private and it's not going to be revealed to others because it makes them vulnerable and makes them feel exposed. So they don't want to reveal that, especially when they're traumatized. And then finally, which is not stated in this objective, but it is part of the objective, is to facilitate fair play or fairness or justice when it comes to victims of violence. Oftentimes, they do want some kind of, even if it's not retribution, which means punishment of the perpetrator, they do want some kind of closure from the violence. And sometimes it comes if you're given a cash award, but that might be just one form of getting closure. But the other one comes from knowing that the perpetrator won't repeat it, or the perpetrator has been punished in a way that they make an example to others, that others will not repeat it. That kind of closure is helpful. So Wika wants to be part of that solution by providing a means by which perpetrators will be discouraged. So the outcomes. The outcomes of the Wika objective is number one, increased reporting, a rise in the number of victims reporting incidences due to the anonymity and security of the platform. That's a goal they have. Another outcome is enhanced safety, which is the improved safety of victims by providing a means of document and report threats or blackmail. So they want to report the threats and the blackmail or potential for it as a deterrence for the same perpetrator carrying out those threats. So if it's reported that you made these threats or it's reported that you blackmailed someone, carrying it out would be a deterrence. That reporting in itself will deter you from carrying it out because the evidence is there that you actually did it intentionally, which makes it a crime. And if you're busted, then it's a serious crime. Number three, evidence collection. This is key if you want to get justice, because the court can't preside over any case without evidence. So you have to collect evidence, and it's collected in a very particular way. So a streamlined process for victims to submit evidence and recordings, aiding in investigations, right? So investigations being the first part, but of course, the admissible evidence being the second part, so that you can make a case. Number four, support resources. So access to support services and resources for victims, fostering a sense of community and assistance. So this is key when you look at, first of all, the gathering of admissible evidence. If, let's say, you've been sexually assaulted, you need to go to a hospital and they have a special section that deals with that to test and ensure and provide the proof that you were sexually assaulted. So that's one service. Another service, of course, is the police, because you do need to report it if it's going to be handled as a crime case. And the police will ask their own questions, and they'll also do their own investigation. So that's number two in terms of services. But number three, which may not be so apparent, is services that relate to money. Oftentimes, if you're going to take this to court, you'll need a defense lawyer. Lawyer needs money. So there are organizations that will support domestic violence victims, but you need to know them, they need to know you, and you need to have a case that they can fund, actually, so that they can ensure that your claim goes to court and you have your day, and the victim or the perpetrator at least is prosecuted. So access to funds is another service. So there are other services as well. I mean, related to supporting victims around insurance. Sometimes it's medical. Sometimes it's depends on the case. But sometimes it's to do with displacement because of social stigmatization and things like that. But those are extraneous. But the main ones we will have to identify and provide within the system access to. Number 5, awareness and education. So increased awareness about the importance of reporting and available resources for victims. So this is part of the Wika outcome, that they need people to know about it. So this has to be discussed. If the app is doing it, then we're not talking about awareness through advertising or social media activation. We're doing it more through the app. So we need to think of a novel way through which awareness and education of this system can be gained using the app. We can leverage social media as within the system, but it is all about the system doing this awareness and education. And then number 6 is data insights, collection of anonymized data to identify trends and inform policy changes regarding victim support and prevention strategies. Okay, so this data, I suppose, will be escalated to policymakers. That's really what that's saying. So it has to have a component of data analytics. So if we look at the system from these 6 outcomes, we can pick out the top 3 and the last 3. I'm just doing it in order that they're ranked. I'll assume they're ranked in order. So number 1 is an increased reporting, a rise in the number of victims reporting. So that's not written to us. You see, we have to interpret this brief. It's coming from the client. We have to interpret it as something that can be designed. So number 1 cannot be designed. An increase in reporting cannot be designed. But what we can design is a reporting process. Okay? So we need to rewrite that as a recording process. And it's an outcome of the app. The app's going to produce, number 1, a reporting process. Okay? Now, as you can imagine, but you can also tell me, one of the things that a reporting process should have is it should be fairly straightforward. I mean, intuitive, understandable. Why do I say that? Well, people who might be reporting, victims of this kind of thing would be in a state of trauma, but they also might be in rural areas. They may not be so exposed to technology. So you can't give them a very techy process. It has to be very straightforward. They come in as visitors. They're asked very straightforward questions, and they answer them intuitively. And it's nothing that requires them to think hard. And it shouldn't be too long. Yeah. So let's just say you can follow the rule of 3s. 3 questions. That's it. You've reported. Okay. Now you might say that 3 is not sufficient to build a case. Well, let them report with the 3 as an identifier, so we know who they are and we know the case has happened. For example, I'll give an example of a process with 3 steps. One is, what's your name? Or what are your names? And you can give an example. Let's say Jane Kamau. Okay. So she writes Jane Kamau. Number 2, how old are you? This can be key because we need to know whether you're an adult or a child. So how old can be number 2. Okay. Number 3, what happened? Now she can write what happened in her own way of writing. All right. Those 3 are central. Now, a lot more detail might be needed, but we can start with that. All right. So when I say this, I mean, barriers to writing those 3 things can be log in and register. First of all, register, then log in. If you say that to someone who's traumatized, register, then log in, they might not do it because of the trauma. So we might want to make it such that visitors to the website, not even the web app, but the website, when they arrive on the scene, on the page, they straight away type in they ask these questions: name, and you could say age, and then of course what happened. Those 3 things they put in, and this can be focused on the home page, and the home page needs to ask a question or tell them to do something like a call for action. Tell them, for example, report the abuse here. You see, that's the name of the page. Report the abuse here. So when they arrive there, they're seeing it as a command. report your abuse here. Now, if you're not, let's say, someone who is abused, then your interest of reporting the abuse is low. I mean, you'll see that and you'll know it's not for you. And of course, it's not for you. It's for someone who's been abused. So someone's been abused, report the abuse here. So you type it in, okay? Something like this. And if we have that kind of simplicity and the call to action is that direct, we're thinking like designers. Designers, we lead the eye. We also speak to the user or the human when they come. We speak to them so that they intuitively know what to do. And that's what we're doing. We're leading their eye, we're speaking to them, we're sort of solving their problem. And we're also targeted. We're not looking for people who are not in our market group. And our market audience here is an abused person. So that kind of approach is on the money. Okay? So you arrive on the website page or you arrive on the screen of the home page for the app, and that's what you see. So you type it in there. Now, if you check carefully, you'll see the login button is there, you see the register button is there, but we're not asking you that to begin with. We ask you to report it. Now, once you've reported it, number 2 is saying enhanced safety. Once that's done, then this information must be stored in a database. And of course, the identifier, like a unique ID, will be assigned to it. The unique ID may not be known to the human, but at least their name is associated with that unique ID. It is saved on the system, and of course, it is safe. Now, it's talking here about reports on threats or blackmail, and this is one of the outcomes that they want to reduce instances of threats or blackmail, or they want to reduce situations where these can be carried out. So the next thing, the way this is again written, enhanced safety, doesn't tell us what to design. We need to rewrite it so that it now tells us what we need to design. So we rewrite that as provide, you could say, a means by which the information can be saved, the primary information can be saved, and collect secondary information. The secondary information would be, have you been threatened? Number 1. I don't know if people know the difference between blackmail and threat, but let's just say we have another set of 3 questions that speak to the security threats, blackmail, and further abuse. We can even maybe look at it time-wise, historic abuse. So we get secondary information relating to, have you been abused by the same person before? We can ask a question, who is the abuser? So they'll write, how are you related? So the abuser's name, abuser's relationship to the one abused, and finally, what have they said by way of threats? What have they said, or how have they threatened you? That kind of thing. All right. So that can be secondary information. Now, when it's written, it's stored in the same location where the primary information was stored. And this helps to guarantee the safety. Why? Because this information is shared with police, for example, the one on threats, in relation, of course, to the victim. So number 1 is about the victim. Number 2 is about the perpetrator. Okay. Number 3, we write it in a way that we can design something. It says evidence collection. So again, it doesn't tell us what are we doing here. We need to rewrite it to tell us exactly what we're doing here. So a streamlined process for the victims to submit violent evidence and recordings aiding in investigations. Now we need to know what kind of information this is, and we may not be well placed to know. However, if we connect them to stakeholders, for example, if we connect them to a doctor who is registered on this app, that means the registration of doctors must happen, or nurses, or hospitals. But there are specific people who are registered on the app to deal with this. And we connect them to those people. Those people we will facilitate to have a live connection or discussion. It could be by chat, or it could be by phone call, or it can be by video call. We can facilitate that within the app. Communication by chat, video call, or chat, video call, or voice call. So those can be facilitated. All right. Now, externally, it can be facilitated. But once you go external to the app, let's say you go to WhatsApp, or you go to email, or you go to a normal call, now the app cannot gather that information. But when these conversations happen within the app, then it's part of the evidence trail that we're building up. So the conversations start with a health expert. All right. So this is now number 3 can be written in a way connect to um, what we can call emergency service providers, something like this. All right. So the hospital being 1, police being number 2. If there's a number 3, we can add them. But let's say number 1 and 2. Number 3 could be an NGO that deals with this kind of thing, because of getting lawyers involved, getting the court involved, and if this is a minor, getting the minor to a safe place, such things. So we can connect to 3 different services. One is the NGO, one is the police, and the third is the hospital or health service provider. All right. So that is written in that way, not evidence collection, but connecting to a health service provider. The goal is to collect information, but the information will be retrieved from the chat timeline, from the voice call recordings, and it could be a video call as well, recordings. So we can actually get the evidence from the communication channel itself. So it's designed like that. Okay. Then we move to the next one. Number 4. What are we doing here? It says support resources. So it says here now we connect to support services and resources, fostering a sense of community and assistance. Yeah, so we can split this up. We can argue number 3 is emergency because you're dealing with the hospital and police, but number 4 can now be the NGO type organization, which will now help you coordinate and talk to you, provide you with counseling and things like that to help you to get to a point where you're safe and you can get justice. So that can be connect to this NGO. We look for a name for that, but it can be just a violence or domestic violence abuse provider, service provider. That kind of service provider is what we want for number 4. All right. There can be others we think of, but we're working with a big idea. We want the primary one. Number 5, awareness and education. So yes, so this is interesting, but what this is making people, 1, aware that Wika exists, and number 2, making them repeat users of, let's say, Wika. All right, that's number 2. And then number 3 is bringing other people who are likely victims, who are vulnerable to Wika. So those are 3 levels at which we need to create awareness. One is when you don't know about Wika, how do we get you to know about it? So we can have an integration with social media to let people know about it. But that integration needs to be a bit like what we did with Social Bytes. It must be something active where Wika produces content which it puts out through admin or salespeople with Wika. So these salespeople generate information about Wika, put it out. It can be based on the analytics, it can be based on testimonials, but they get that and they put it out in social media in different places. And when they get traffic to move to their website, from the website, the activities that are on the website filter down people who are on the website from the social media chat. And why that matters is because these people will have a certain thing they're looking for. So they'll be filtered, they'll be sorted, and based on how they respond, they will now register with the Wika system. They can register online or they can register, let's say, on the app itself. And once they register, they're still not active users. They're simply registered users. But to become an active user, you start with the process of reporting. And each time the website is having, you can say, it's designed in such a way to encourage them and to motivate them to actually start reporting. So if you have something to report, the website's encouraging you to do it. If you don't, you will just leave the website. But if you do, it's encouraging you to do that. So you report. And once you report, then these things start to kick in. You start to connect with different stakeholders. Your case is treated as private, but you get calls, you get text messages, and the whole process of, you could say, mindfulness and healthcare and mental care, wellness, that sort of thing will start kicking in to help a victim or potential victim get help. So awareness can start in that way. It can start on social media for people who don't know. But for people who are already using Wika, at different points, you want to talk to them to become repeated users. And how do you do that? Well, you keep on reminding them of benefits, for example. If, let's say, you've successfully reported number two to police and the hospital, information can be given to them about people who successfully have done that, what they have gone on to do to achieve, how their lives have improved. You can give them information. In other words, every one of these stages should be designed in a way that feedback mechanisms are positive, encouraging scenarios that any victim would want to be part of. All right, so that they keep going, but they also are being informed that Wika does this, Wika does that. If you do this, you can be like so and so. They used Wika like that. So this is now marketing in-app itself to current users. And then finally, if they're happy with their experience with Wika, then Wika can ask them to introduce a friend. They might know someone in a similar situation. So it can facilitate sharing the Wika experience with someone else. And then, of course, giving them a link so that those people can come to Wika to tell their story and then start going through the process as well. So those three would be under number 5. Number 1 is the external social media awareness of random people out there. Number 2 is the targeted in-app experience where they're marketing to registered customers, or let's call them users. And then number 3 is where the customers, the ones who are actually using the app, are reaching out as advocates for the app, asking other people to join. So those are 3 ways we can facilitate this. And that's okay. That meets that objective. Number 6 is about data insights. Now, when you're generating a story, one of the ways to generate stories is using analytics, facts about stuff you know, stuff you can defend. So the app in itself is producing facts. I mean, it has analytics, so it produces facts. So we should design it in such a way that it's able to produce interesting facts that would not only support sales or marketing. Marketing is general awareness, like on social media, but direct sales is where you get customers to actually use Wika. That's direct selling. But we need to get facts and analytics that will support both sales and marketing. That's number 6. Okay, and this is now the admin people, the sales people, the marketing people who are using Wika that way, not necessarily the victim. So how many users do we have then on Wika? We have the victim, that's one. Number 2 is we have the, we can say service providers. Number 3, we have the admin people. The admin people are sales, marketing, and yeah, let's just say sales and marketing for now. They could be customer service. So let's say sales, marketing, and customer service. So those are the 3 types of users that we have. Now, why I'm telling you all this is because, as you know, we need to design a mental model for this. That's where we start. But before we do the mental model, we need to understand the brief from the client. Then we need to rewrite the brief. I've just gone through it with you now, so I need you to rewrite this. And when you write the objective and you write the expected outcomes, it's the title here is not project scope, it's an interpretation of the client's brief. Whereas what's written over here is the client's brief. I'll share this file with you so that you have the Word document. But we need to write our own document that is an interpretation of this. Our interpretation of it speaks to what needs to be done. Okay? But how do you speak to what needs to be done? So let me tell you, because this is very important. You need to know and you need to write this way. You need to write the problem statement. You see, there's an objective here. This objective maps onto a problem. The objective has 3 parts. It has the objective of security, confidentiality, and justice. Justice is not written here, but it's something the client talks about. So I think that's an omission on their part. But this is a recording which you can go through and you'll see. So the objective speaks to 3. So that means there's a problem with security or the lack of it, the lack of confidentiality, and the lack of, you could say, justice. You see? So you have to write that as the problem statement. That's number one. Number two, in the interpretation of the brief, you need to, you see these 6 outcomes. You need to write these 6 outcomes as solutions to the problem. So if you have 3 problems, then you have 3 solutions for sure. 3 primary solutions mapped onto the 3 primary problems. And the 3 primary problems you can see clearly are security, confidentiality, and we're saying justice. So you have to, from here, 3 that map onto that. Those become the primary solutions. And your big idea is on your primary solutions. Okay? But if your big idea can't work without the secondary solutions, then you have to have the secondary problems and you map the next 3 outcomes as secondary solutions onto secondary problems. You have to break it down that way. This is very important. If you understand the importance, then you're able to succeed here because Wika is complicated. But the way to simplify it is to build a minimum viable solution. And from there, we build on it until we have the full thing. So we're breaking it down now. The design process is breaking it down into its bare components. Okay? So you have the primary problem mapped onto the onto the objective, which is a 3-part objective. Then you have the secondary problem, which is mapped onto the sub-objectives. Again, 3 sub-objectives. All right. So once you have that, then you're okay. You have the problem, you have the solution. Okay. Now, in some ways, these expected outcomes are a guide to the solution, and the solution is mapped to the problem. So these extended outcomes are also a guide to the problem. Okay, it's just that the client is writing it this way. We have to constructively align things. We have to align our solution to our problem, which we state, now to the objective, which we are writing as a 3-part objective. All right, so we rewrite everything. The client will not refuse because they'll see what they want in it, so they'll accept. But we have to write it for clarity because otherwise we have a problem with designing. All right, I hope you understand that. But if you have questions, feel free to ask me. Do you have anything you want to ask, Nelly, on this?
For the Wika design, I will go through the brief, and then my course tutor asked me when I'm being assessed. She told me to keep her posted.
Yeah, so the assessor has said that they don't want to assess you while they're on strike. So that has been a problem. However, I've been asking you many times to give me that book because you can't be assessed unless I fill in my part. When are you giving me the book?
I'll send it today. I already compiled it, everything.
Yeah. So as much as possible, Nelly, try to send it. Try so that I can do my part. Even for the assessor to come, I need to have filled it out, right? So send it as you're saying. When like now you've said that again, but now do it. Then I will now act on it on my side. But I need a couple of days. You send it today. By Sunday, I've done it. Then the assessor can now come. But the assessor has said when I ask them that they don't want to do it when the strike is on. But I can still ask them. But at least on your part, let the work be ready for assessment. Okay? All right. Now, okay, if you have other questions on this, I'm now talking on this one. Do you have questions on it?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So I'm going through this in a very specific way, and I hope you're understanding, and I'm recording it so that you can see how it's done. If you understand what I'm doing, this will happen quickly and it will happen smoothly also, because then you're aligning your output with the expectations on the other side. I'll tell you more about this client at the end, but I need you to know the nature of the technical work so that you see what needs to be done. Then you at the end, I'll show you why it matters because we're aligning what we're saying and doing with the expectations of the client. But I'll tell you more about that at the end. So here, which is very important when you're crafting, let's say a brief, like in our case, an interpretation of a brief, is the target audience. Who are the target audience? And this is going to inform your persona profile. So here the client has written who they consider to be the target users. Let's look at what the client has written. First of all, the victims of abuse. Fair enough. Those are our primary users. Then you have the survivors of domestic violence. That's interesting. Survivors who have used the app, because we're talking about the app, would be interesting, because we can see how to feature them, the ones who are, you could argue, existing customers, and we're looking at them as repeat customers. All right, and how can we use them? We can use them for advocacy. For example, they can be the ones going out and spreading the evangelizing about the app. Okay, so we have to give them a role. So if the role of, let's say, survivors is to evangelize the app, then they can be helpful in marketing. And marketing is part of the awareness and the education of the app. So that becomes a good user, a real user. They can be primary or secondary. But let's look at another one. Individuals facing blackmail or threats. No. Now, these ones are the same as the victims. Let's say same level, because when you're a victim, you're still reporting the threats. You're reporting the abuse, and you're also reporting the threats. So you can also decide that you're going to report no abuse, but there are threats. You can do that. Okay, so number 3 and number 1 are the same, but two different types of users of the same. So there are two victims. One is of abuse, and the other is facing blackmail or threats. Now, if you can distinguish that, you see, when you're doing your scenarios, you can break this up so that you can say that victims of abuse, let's say victims, is a generalization, but that generalization is comprised of victims of abuse and individuals facing blackmail or threats. You see, so there are two instances of the generalization of victims. That's 1 and 3. Okay, then you have this one, at-risk communities. Okay, members of communities that are disproportionately affected by violence or abuse. Now, communities are not tribal. This can be, for example, young mothers or single mothers. It can be women in low-income households, for example. I'm not saying, it just depends on the data. But we're talking of communities, people who are in situations that are common. You can see, for example, if you're in a low income neighborhood and the instances of domestic violence in that neighborhood are high, and it's women who are wives in homes who are being abused. If you're in that kind of community, for some reason, the abuse cases are high, you become in an at-risk community, you see. Yeah, so this is interesting, but these would be part of the target audience. And this is now a community, not an individual. So I put a question mark on that, because how do you objectify them so that you can target them? And what service can you give them? What's their role in the app? I can't even see. You see, you're talking of a demographic. Okay, so how do you target that demographic? So that's an interesting one, but let them put it last. Then we have this one, the support organizations. Okay, we had identified those as service providers, and we have a whole list. So we have the support organizations, we have the police, we have the hospitals, we have the experts like counselors, people like those. Yeah, so this can fall under that. We have two types of, let's say, you know, um, service providers. We have the support organizations, and that would be like NGOs or, let's say, police or hospitals. But we also have the individuals, like doctors, counselors, nurses. Those are individuals. So there are two types there under, you could say, this service provider. These are primary. Okay, and then you have law enforcement agencies. Yeah, so this is number 6 is part of number 5. These are instances of one type of persona, service providers. Okay, and you can fragment them. You can have the important ones like emergency, and then the others who are not emergency. You can divide them into those categories. Police might fall under emergency. Hospital might fall under emergency. But support organizations, these ones might fall under non-emergency. You see, that's how to simplify this whole thing. So now we have 3 primary users, and these are personas. We have, you can say, victims. Of course, they are the abuse, and we also have the ones who are blackmailed. So we have the victims. That's one type. Then we have the survivors, who are important, okay, because they help us with marketing and evangelizing. And then we have the this group 5 and 6. service support providers. So those are 3 target market groups. Now, you indicate them at the general level, but you split them into their different instances to capture what's important. Like here, what's missing here is the hospital, and that's important. So you want to add that. But there are instances of the general support providers, um, service provider, or let's say target audience. So we're targeting them: service providers, victims, and survivors. Okay. Now this one, at-risk communities, can be a fourth persona, but I don't know yet how they would participate on the app. I'd have to ask the client. I can see how they might be useful, but we have to think of it from the app perspective. So what are we designing for them? What's their role on the app? I can't see that role. If you can think of a role, that will be good. And if you can think of how we can target them, because if they have a role, then we provide them with a process that they can go through to play their role. Just like we're providing a process for the victims to play their role, we'll provide the at-risk communities a process to go through to play their role. But we have to think it like that. What's your role? Then here's the process. So we have to design that process. And then it has to have a particular deliverable, an outcome at the end. So that process is not just hanging. It does something and then you achieve something. Okay? So we need the personas. We'll come to this and summarize. Here we have the, yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's it. So what do we need to do then this week in order for us to be ready to start the visual aspects of design maybe next week? What do we need to do? So number one, the app, I'll give you the logo. The app logo is known. The app name is known. So they have a logo, and the logo has its own colors. It has its own font. It also has its own slogan. So I'll give you those so that you have that. So that's a given. What you need to do is to create, first of all, to interpret the client's brief. And that interpretation of the client's brief is explaining the way I suggested the overall objective, and it's a 3-part objective. The problem statement, it's a 3-part statement that feeds into the main objective. The main objective has what they're calling 6 outcomes, but we want to have 3 plus 3. So we say 3 main outcomes and then 3 secondary outcomes. Okay, so when you now do the solution, you'll have 3 primary solutions mapped onto the 3, you can say, main outcomes, and there's 3 secondary solutions mapped onto the 3, let's say, these are not main outcomes, they're just ordinary outcomes. All right, so that mapping is important so that we maintain that flow. Okay, so once you've written that, that's an important part of the document, but we just need that interpretation done. We need that by next week. The next thing we need is the mental model. So we start visualizing. The mental model is an expression of the big idea. And you know how that works. So the big idea revolves around the primary users. So it may be initiated by the victim, and then comes in, you could say, the service providers, like police in the hospital. So those service providers are part of the big idea. And then yeah, it could be that. So as long as that happens, then the system is going to give them a chance to play their role in reporting, capturing the information as evidence, and sharing the evidence with the parties involved. For example, lawyers will want different bodies of evidence. Police will ask different questions, and the hospital will ask different things. So the system facilitates the gathering of this evidence and then the sharing of this evidence to the different parties involved. I mean, what the hospital wants is not what the police wants, that kind of thing. Okay? So the mental model should capture that in a way that is clear. It's simple, but it's clear. All right? If you understand what I've said, then that's good. Once you've done the mental model, is when we move now to the persona profile, because at the end of the day, the users provide us the scope of work. It comes out of the users we're targeting. And we have seen from the list, there are three main primary users, and there's a fourth one, at-risk communities. But even though we have three, these three can be exploded into about six. Because number one, the victim has two components. It has the abused and the threatened, but that represents the victims. Then it has, you could argue, the let's call them service providers. Again, that's one body, but they can be exploded three ways: into the hospital, the police, and the support organizations. Okay, so we need to have those personas. Now, the organizations of police, hospital, and support organizations, you have to have a way by which you talk of them not as individuals, but as organizations. But they have to have a demographic and psychographic persona, just like you have for the individual. But write that out so that we can say. Okay, so that's number two. Number three, the third type of user is, I forget. Let me just see. Survivors of domestic violence. Now, these are unique. They have a role in, you could say, more of marketing than anything else. So they provide testimonials. They have a lived experience of using Wika, so they can speak from personal experience. They've also been abused, so they can talk about that. So they can help in evangelizing the benefit of using Wika and also the bigger picture, which is the benefit of actually reporting um, cases of domestic violence. So we need to facilitate them if they're users on our system. So that's a third persona. Okay. The at-risk communities is optional. If you can get them to be represented, then you can go ahead. So that you need to do also. And then finally, if you succeed in doing that, that's not bad. Because once that's done, we get into the user story design. So we can do that next week, but try to have what I've described to you ready so that it's clear the mental model, the personas, the interpretation of the brief, that's quite clear. Okay. Um, Next week, we can get into the user stories. And in order for us to do that, we need to get into the scenario design. So we'll look at the tasks and the different scenarios and use cases, build those, and then we'll get into the user stories and acceptance criteria, which will now open it up to designing the actual system. The system has, as you know, it has several components, but it has basically the web component and the app component. Okay, that's client side, but server side, it has the server component. So we'll need to design these, and that will come in the third week. So if you can do what we've just discussed today by Thursday, we meet next week. That's a big breakthrough. And then next week we get into the user stories in the path that I explained, so that we now have at least low fidelity, you could say, designs done in a way that we can understand. But we can start also working with medium fidelity. So the low fidelity will give us a functional sense of and a feel of the app, but the look of the app will come through the visual appeal. So we can also start fooling around with that next week so that we get a sense of how the interface would look, the iconery would look, the feeling or the look, let's say, of the pages. We can also start experimenting and exploring that. But by the third week, we definitely are looking at color schemes, layouts, and prototypes by the third week. So that gives you a sense of the schedule of work, right? In this first week, we're concerned with ideation and interpretation. In the second week, we're concerned with user stories, and actualizing the big idea. So we build on what we've started this week. And then in the final week, we're concerned with the visual color scheming, layouts, and we could say prototyping. Okay, so that will be Wika. Do you have questions on this, Nelly? Anything that you want to add or suggest as we go? Now I'm coming to the end. So I want you to feel free to weigh in. Tell me if there's questions you have or stuff that I need to clarify. Mm. Do you have anything you'd like to say or add? Are you
I,
there? I'm not sure if you're speaking because I don't hear you.
I don't have any question.
Okay. All right then. So I want to close now, but in closing, it's like this. First of all, I need to, you see, when I close, I come back to your internship because your internship now needs to be addressed. But before I address that, I want to say that you need to, you see, the internship window is 12 weeks. It's like 3 months. Examination for that happens after 8 weeks, as you know. However, this is like your 10th week, maybe. I'm not sure. And we need to finish it within the 12 weeks. I'd like us to finish this week up within your internship window. Now, the client, I'm assuming on your end, once you're done, you're interested in having a job that pays. The internship also pays, but it pays based on work that we do that pays. So, this work you're doing for Social Bytes and also for Wika are for clients who are startups and they are willing to pay, but they need to see the work, approve it, and then pay. So you can get paid for it. But I can't give you a contract until they approve it. So the sooner you can get this done, not only can I facilitate your payment for the work that you've done, but I can also escalate a discussion on you now working formally because these jobs need to be produced. You see what I'm saying? For example, Wika wants to produce this app in December. They want it done by December. But to have it done by December, you have to start work on it before December. If your internship is ending in September, for example, maybe by October you can start working. You see, but we need Wika to say, yes, we've approved all this. We will now have a contract as a company with Wika, and we can engage you to be the designer for this product. You see, that's a job now. We can give you a contract. And the kind of work, the timeline for producing Wika is 1 year. So we can give you a 1 year contract straight away against Wika. If Social Bytes comes through, then you're guaranteed. That's guaranteed business because now we have two apps you've worked on that are having clients that are giving us contracts. You see what I'm saying? So if you're interested in work, you see, work requires output. You have to produce what I'm trying to ask you to produce so I can present to the client so that the client can now commit now and sign that we're going to engage you to produce this app. All right. Now, for you, it's good because that's your career starting. On one hand, you have a job, so that's great. But on the other hand, now you have a means by which you can build your credentials, your portfolio. You're working on a real thing. So that becomes a different state of learning. You're not learning as you were before. You're now learning by working. Okay. So I want to encourage you to try as hard as you can to complete this in the format and the way that we are discussing it, so that you can move on beyond your internship right away to start working. That's what I'm encouraging. And I need you then, like now we have to meet on Thursday. So when we meet on Thursday, have the stuff ready. And if you have the stuff ready, we can move on to the next step. Clients do not understand what I have just told you. They don't understand it. And even if they do understand it, it's all academic. They don't see how what I've spoken about can translate itself into something meaningful. It's only us who know how it translates. So we have to get to the point where we can start prototyping. At the point we prototype, that's the touch point of the client or the user with the product. Then the client will start to have a catching moment that, oh, that's how it looks, that's how it works. You see, then now they'll see how it can be helpful to them. You see. So we have to get to that because the presentation is very powerful when we have a prototype, but we have to get to that. Now, the reason for all this exercise we're going through is only one: to constructively align our work with the big idea. Otherwise, we can design something, an app, and then it's off. It's on messaging, it's missing things. Then the client really has issues. But now it's to design in such a way that we get all the issues, align them constructively, and make sure that the prototype has those things. You see? And there are many. There's the visuals, there's the function. There are these things that we have to make sure that the features all align and map onto what the client wants in sequence. You see? So it's quite a job. That's the design exercise. It's not impossible, it's possible. So we're doing it in a systematic way. So I hope we can meet them same time. We can say Thursday at 6:30, because I have another meeting that starts at 7. So if I meet you at 6:30 and we get out of the meeting by 7, that's the best for me. I have another one at 7, then I have another one at 8, and I have another one at 9. In fact, and then on Friday I have meetings. So that's why I encourage, if we say Thursday at 6, I'm good. Then I'll finish with you in 30 minutes, and then I move on to the next meeting. Are you able to keep to that, or how do you see? I need us to discuss so I know how your time is.
I'll try to be on time, but I'm usually so much engaged that I usually prefer from 7:30. But I can try to keep to create time.
Okay. And I understand that you might be engaged, but I need us to pick a time and a day that we're sure about. Partly because I don't have flexibility. The reason is these other meetings, with you, I'm just alone with you right now, and we're doing this one on one. But in the other jobs that I'm working on, there are many people involved. So it's not easy for me to reorganize them because of the numbers. You know, in the next meeting I have, there are about 5 people. Then the one after that, there are about 7 people. And then after that, there are about 16 people. You see, so organizing and reorganizing with them is hard. But you and I, it's the easiest, partly because it's just you and I, we agree. So if you tell me that you know it is difficult, like I'm suggesting 6:30 on Thursdays. If that's a difficult time for you, you can counter suggest something. Then we see how we can work it out so that we can have our meetings without fail. It helps when it's without fail because I also get involved with a lot of things, and then I cannot keep up when there are so many jobs and I'm juggling them. You see? But if we maintain, then I can fix those and block those moments and then make sure I'm available for that. That's why you see me talking like this. I needed a time that you're sure of, and it's not for you dicey. If it's dicey for you, what happens is that you'll be late coming. Now, what I'll be literally telling you is, oh, you've come at, let's say, 6:47. We have 13 minutes. Now, in 13 minutes, I don't know if we can have a meaningful discussion on all these things. Sometimes we can, because you can see a lot of what we're doing is kind of following through on what we did before. But that's not the issue. The issue always, you see, we're using a method to execute design thinking. The issue is the design thinking. What I need you to learn is how to think and problematize situations so that you can construct meaning. What I'm doing for you is constructing meaning. I'm not an expert on any of these things, like these subject areas. They're all different. But I understand the methodology of design thinking and I know how to use interaction design technologies. So I'm putting them together to construct meaning for clients and different audiences. So you have clients on one side who pay and audiences who use the product. Our job is to construct the meaning. That's what I'm teaching you, is how to construct meaning. Not so much, you see, the method is the same, the tools are the same, but the construction of meaning is different. So it's all about constructing meaning, and you have to have an understanding of these landscapes. In other words, know how to extract by research, how to psychoanalyze, how to. Um, you need to understand people. You need to understand need. You need to understand clients. You see, and then you need to understand the technology so that you can bring these together. That's really what this is all about, and that's what I mean by construction of meaning at the touch point where it's needed. It's always with interaction design at the touch point where it's needed, just in time. You see. So tell me, when is good for you to meet without straining or without having to move things around too much, so that it's more realistically possible. That's what I'm asking now. Are you able to know?
You can do Thursday 6:30.
You think Thursday 6:30 you can make it?
Yes.
Nelly.
Yes, 6:30 Thursday.
Okay. Now, don't say it to be nice. Say it because it's possible. And when I'm saying it, it's because why I'm saying it this way is because we need to be realistic if we're going to achieve something with this session we have. And for me, what will be good is if you can get a job out of this. You getting a job also means I'm getting a job because we're working on this together, you see, and the client is paying. And so that will be good. So I'm asking you to say it based on that, that you know if we say that time we can make it and then we can achieve it, then that's good. That will be great. Okay, I can achieve it if you say that because I'll block things. I'll just block Thursday 6:30 because I know that we're meeting, and then that's good. Once it shifts, it becomes tricky. I have to start looking around. Okay, so that's great. The final thing, then, absolutely final thing, is the issue of your internship. So please remember tonight to send me what I need to fill in. Again, if you send it tonight, it takes me 2 days to fill it in. Why? Because of other work I'm doing. So if you send it, I will now organize my time in the next 2 days to fill in my part of it. And then I'll talk to my colleague to come and assess you. But you know the lecturer strike is on, and the lecturer strike is constitutionally legal. So nobody can force a lecturer to teach or to do their work when they are on strike. They're on the side of the Constitution, and if you go against that, it's us now who are violating the Constitution. So that's the problem we're in right now. And I'm letting you know. Even your course tutor knows that. So um, I will, once I've done my part, let's say in 2 days after you send it, then I will ask my colleague again. And if he agrees to come, we'll do it. I'll tell you when. If not, I'll let you know also. So that's what you're facing right now with this strike going on. And the strike, as we speak, has no end date at the moment. Mm, okay. If you want to ask questions on that, feel free. Do you have questions on that?
I don't have any question.
Okay. Yeah, if you need to know anything on it, just let me know. But that's where we are. Okay. Um, it may not affect you so drastically if the strike ends in good time. When I say good time, graduation issues are finalized in October. That's next month. So I believe that's enough time to resolve issues. But if not, then we'll have to play it by ear and see how it goes. Okay? All right then, Nelly. So I think that's the end. If you have anything to say off the record, I can switch off the recording.